the Mausoleum of Mausolus. The marble monument would rise to 135 feet tall, enclosing a great courtyard. The roof was a pyramid with a staircase on each side, a pathway to heaven. More than 2,500 years later, the tomb of U.S. President Ulysses S. Grant in New York City would be designed after the Mausoleum of Mausolus. By the 4th century B.C., Persian engineering was still the finest in the world. But underneath the soaring columns and shining palaces, the empire's very foundations were crumbling. And its enemies were soon at the gate.
When Athens supports a rebellion in Egypt and Greeks occupy the capital city of Memphis, Artaxerxes leaves Persepolis and his building projects, and he launches a military campaign to kick the Greeks out of Memphis and bring Egypt back under Persian control once again. It'll be the last great victory of the Persian Empire, because in 424 BC, Artaxerxes dies, leaving a power vacuum and 8 solid decades of rampant infighting and neglect. And while the Persian Empire is embroiled in internal conflict and corruption, a young Macedonian prince is studying Herodotus and the accounts of the great Persian hero Cyrus the Great. And this Macedonian prince will set his eyes on conquering the world. His name is Alexander.
In 336 BC, a distant relative of Artaxerxes rose to power. He took a regal name, Darius III. He will always be remembered as the king who lost an empire. Over the next 4 years, Alexander and Darius III met head-to-head in a series of fierce battles, as Darius III's army was slowly pushed back to its own doorstep. In 330 BC, Alexander was at the gates of the empire's crown jewel, the capital city of Persepolis.
Alexander adopted the Persian policy of respecting the defeated. None of his soldiers were allowed to pillage or plunder the lands they had conquered. But how do you tame so many soldiers after a victory over the most magnificent empire on planet E? Well, maybe his soldiers were restless or resentful, or maybe they just remembered the stories of how Athens had been burned by the Persians. In any case, at Persepolis, they let go. Huge celebrations took place after the victory, and during these celebrations, the treasury was pillaged. And then one of the saddest acts of arson in all of history took place. Persepolis was burned.
Alexander was not in the business of destroying things. Persepolis probably was burned because it was a symbolic thing. And he also burned it to make a symbolic gesture, not a destructive gesture.
There must have been wonderful draperies and things around, and no doubt fire could have begun accidentally just as much as purposefully, because if he really wanted to be an Achaemenid king, the last thing he should want to do was to destroy Persepolis. But there were no fire engines, and once the blaze had taken hold, it was a very terrible blaze, and it left its mark throughout the site.
Darius III had escaped capture, but in the summer of 330 BC, he was murdered by a close ally. The last Achaemenid king was dead. Alexander gave Darius III a magnificent funeral, and later even married his daughter. Alexander declared himself an Achaemenid Persian king, and added the final chapter to the story of an empire that had spanned 3 continents and endured for over 2,700 years.
Alexander, admirer of Persian kings, chased down the murderers of Darius and killed them himself. Alexander believed that only kings had the right to kill kings. But would have Alexander actually killed Darius? Probably not, because Alexander didn't create an empire, he only conquered one. The empire already existed, created by Cyrus the Great. No, Alexander's genius was to co-opt and use Persia, an empire that stood long before Alexander was born, and whose legacy of culture and sophistication and luxury would be around long after Alexander was dead. For the History Channel, I'm Peter Weller.